The stars above the planet Sarnaxis had always been calm. Cold, distant, eternal. Generations had passed since the last time their skies had known war. In the minds of the elders, peace was all that remained of the galaxy's tangled history. The stories of ancient empires, extinct species, and cosmic conquerors were treated as old myths, none more mysterious than the tales of humans. Nobody really believed them anymore. The records were sparse. Conflicting reports described them as gods, demons, machines, or monsters. Some said they burned out in their own fire. Others claimed they simply vanished, swallowed by the void. A few whispered that they had been betrayed, wiped out before they could fulfill some great destiny. But on this day, the sky cracked. A sharp, trembling tone rang across Sarnax's defense grids. The planetary sensors lit up like they hadn't in centuries. At first they thought it was an error, a glitch. Then the technicians saw the first wave. 1 ship, then 100, then 1,000, then 10,000. No standard signature, no familiar frequency, no allegiance to the ruling galactic accord. The formations were brutal, perfect. Not decorative like the fleets of the modern day, but functional, like hammers forged in silence for one purpose: war. From the mountains, the cities, even from the floating towers of the Chancellor's palace, all eyes turned skyward as darkness rolled across the horizon, a shadow cast by metal. Captain Jorath of the Sarnaxis Defense Fleet barked into the comms, but he already knew. They were not prepared. Not for this. The orbital cannons hadn't fired in 100 years. The ships in dock were ceremonial more than combat-ready. He looked at the formation above and shivered, not because of fear, but because of recognition. A buried part of his memory, something he read long ago in a forbidden archive, stirred. A name that had been spoken only in warning, only in fear. Humans. "Sir," his second-in-command whispered, voice shaking, "do we engage?" Jorath's jaw tightened. "Number we listen." And just as he spoke, the broadcast came. No translation matrix needed. The voice pierced through language, through time, through doubt. It was male, cold, controlled, and it didn't ask for permission. "This is Admiral Kren of the Terran Remnant. You have 24 hours to evacuate. This planet was ours before your ancestors crawled into starlight. We have returned to take what is ours." Silence. The broadcast ended, but its echo lingered. In the control chamber, the Chancellor stumbled to his feet, disbelief carved into his wrinkled face. "They were myths," he muttered. "Extinct, gone." Captain Jorath said nothing. He kept his eyes on the growing mass of ships above, heart pounding with a feeling he hadn't known since he was a boy. Not fear, not awe, something far deeper, something every species in the galaxy had once known. Dread. Panic was quiet at first. Like a whisper, it crawled through the corridors of Sarnaxis government halls, leaked into civilian networks, then surged through the undercurrents of society. People didn't run, not immediately. They froze. Some prayed. Some laughed nervously. But deep down, everyone knew something ancient had awoken. In the Chancellor's war room, high above the city, the most powerful leaders of the planet gathered. Their robes were ceremonial, their faces artificially ageless. These were people who had never fought a real war, never tasted what it meant to bleed for a cause. Their authority had been unchallenged for generations, until now. "The broadcast is fake," said Minister Draylen, his voice tight with denial. "It has to be. A rogue pirate fleet, maybe, playing with relic technology. Humans haven't existed for over 1,000 years." You saw the ships, Minister, Captain Jorath said, standing straight in his dusty fleet uniform. Those weren't pirates. That wasn't salvage. That was military precision, disciplined, terrifyingly coordinated. Another voice spoke, quieter but heavier. Advisor Rel, the only member in the room old enough to remember when the Accord still classified humans as a high-threat species. If it's really them, she said, then we're not dealing with a rogue force. We're witnessing a return. A return of what? Someone spat. Monsters, machines, myths. Humanity, Rel answered. The very thing we erased from history because we were too afraid to face what we did to them. A heavy silence filled the chamber. Far above, in low orbit, the Terran fleet remained motionless. 10,000 ships, perfectly still, forming a silent wall between the stars and the surface below. Not a single shot had been fired. Yet. In the cities below, citizens crowded around holographic displays, eyes wide with terror. No one had seen anything like it. The massive triangular flagships that dwarfed even the largest Accord vessels. The obsidian armor plating with no identifiable markings. Just one symbol, burned into the side of each ship. HRS, Human Remnant Supremacy. For decades, the galaxy had told itself a convenient lie. That humans had vanished. That their history was an exaggeration, a myth. Even the few planets that once bore human ruins had been reclassified. The records changed, erased. But here they were, not as saviors, not as victims, as executioners. Back on Sarnaxis, the Chancellor gripped the edges of the war table. His voice trembled with something more than fear. Shame. Why now? Why return after all this time? Captain Jorath answered without looking away from the screen. Because they never forgot. We did. Meanwhile, aboard the flagship HRS Dauntless, Admiral Kren stood in the observation deck, surrounded by silence and steel. He wore no medals, no flamboyant uniform, just matte black armor built for war. His face was lined with age, but his eyes burned with a cold fire that never dimmed. He stared down at Sarnaxis through reinforced glass. Status? He asked without turning. Planetary shields remain inactive, his officer replied. Surface communications disrupted. No military movement, yet. Fear is their shield, Kren muttered. They don't believe we're real. They will. Kren finally turned. The crew around him, humans all, hardened by decades in deep space, raised in silence and shadow, stood at attention. Each of them was a child of exile. Their ancestors had been hunted, scattered, branded criminals by the Accord. Forced to survive in the dark corners of the galaxy, in asteroid belts, in hollowed-out moons, in places where laws didn't reach. For centuries they had rebuilt, in silence, in hate, in purpose. The Accord had expected humanity to die off in the cold. They forgot what humans were made of. Ready the landing units, Kren said. Sir, his officer blinked. We haven't given them the full 24 hours yet. I know, Kren said calmly, but they won't listen. They'll stall. Beg for diplomacy, then call for backup. He stepped forward, placing a hand on the glass. Humanity didn't come back to negotiate. We came to take what was stolen. Back on Sarnaxis, panic had shifted into desperation. The Chancellor sent a private signal to the Galactic Accord, requesting immediate intervention. Reinforcements, peace envoys, anything. But no reply came. It wasn't an accident. The Accord had known. Somewhere deep in the heart of the Accord's central worlds, sealed in high-level archives, the truth had been buried long ago. The purge, the betrayal, the silence. Now the lie had broken open, and no one was willing to stand between the ghosts of humanity and their vengeance. Advisor Rel stood at the balcony of the Chancellor's Tower, eyes fixed on the black wall of ships in the sky. Her hands trembled. "I read the old files once," she said softly. "Humans weren't always monsters. They were just better at surviving than anyone else. Smarter, meaner, hungrier. And when they stopped being useful, when they demanded respect, we turned on them." Captain Jorath looked at her. "You believe this is retribution?" "I believe," she said slowly. "We're lucky they're only asking for the planet. Do we evacuate?" She shook her head. "We don't have enough ships, not for billions." Jorath exhaled sharply, jaw clenched. "Then we fight?" "We surrender, or we die." "But what happens after?" he asked. "When they take Sarnaxis, will they stop?" Rel turned her eyes back to the sky. "No," she said. "They've just started." In orbit, Admiral Kren walked through the lower decks of Dauntless, past rows of cryopods and training chambers, past young soldiers drilling in perfect silence. These weren't conquerors. They were the children of war, bred from loss and steel. In one chamber, a boy barely 16 was reading aloud an old Terran document, something ancient, a speech once given by a human leader before the fall. "We do not forgive. We do not forget. And when the time comes, we do not ask for peace. We take it." Kren stopped to listen. The boy looked up. "Admiral." Kren nodded. "Good. Keep reading. These words were written for today. 20 hours since the broadcast. On Sarnaxis, the countdown loomed. Some tried to flee in private ships, only to be denied launch clearance. The defense fleet still hadn't moved. They knew they would die if they did. Fear held the government in a chokehold. And then the first drop pod fell. A single capsule, black and burning through atmosphere, slammed into the heart of the Capitol Square. Crowds scattered. Alarms screamed. From the smoke, a lone human soldier stepped out. No helmet, no weapon in hand. Just armor, marked with the same Terran insignia. He stood in silence, looking around, watching. And then more fell. Dozens, hundreds. Not in attack formation, but like a message. A reminder. "We are here." Captain Jorath stood at the edge of the square, hand resting on the grip of his sidearm. His soldiers flanked him, weapons trembling in their hands. The human didn't flinch. Jorath stepped forward. "You're early." The soldier smiled faintly. "Time means little when you've waited this long." The human looked around. "Everything that was taken, and the apology we never received." Jorath swallowed. "You'll never get it from this council." "I know," the soldier said. "That's why they won't be on it much longer." Behind him, more pods descended. 10,000 ships above. 10,000 soldiers below, and the sky darkened, not with ash, but with justice that had waited too long in silence. The ground beneath Sarnaxis didn't tremble the way people expected. There were no loud explosions, no frantic screams echoing through burning streets, not at first. The invasion didn't come like thunder, it came like a scalpel. Across the capital, the black pods continued to fall, one by one, with terrifying precision. Each touched down with the grace of a machine that had done this 1,000 times before. No random drops, no misfires. Everything was calculated, controlled. On every rooftop, on every major intersection, every key government building, Terran soldiers appeared. And not a single one fired a shot. It was psychological warfare. A statement. We don't need chaos to take your world. Chancellor Varn, hidden deep in the Citadel's secure command chamber, watched the feed in silence. His face was pale, his voice gone dry. He'd spent his entire life being the highest authority on the planet. His word had reshaped laws, sealed fates, created futures. Now he was irrelevant, powerless, hunted. "They haven't issued another demand," muttered Minister Drellin beside him. "What do they want?" "They want us to break," said Advisor Rel quietly. And they were. Civil order collapsed in less than an hour. With every soldier that appeared, another government official fled. Another police commander laid down arms. Another military unit went dark. The people of Sarnaxis weren't built for war. They'd been softened by centuries of peace. The humans? They were raised on vengeance. Out in the streets, Captain Jorath walked alongside the first Terran emissary. The soldier, who hadn't given a name, moved calmly, helmet under one arm, his pale face unreadable. His squad followed behind, weapons holstered. None of them had spoken since landing. They didn't need to. "I expected more fire," Jorath muttered, as they passed a checkpoint where Accord soldiers now stood aside, their rifles placed at the feet of statues built to honor a long-dead regime. The emissary looked at him. "Terror isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks quietly and lets your own people collapse." Jorath didn't argue. He saw it with his own eyes. Terran troops weren't looting or burning. They were claiming, replacing, turning landmarks into outposts, using the enemy's silence as fuel. Sarnaxis had surrendered before it even realized it had. Inside the Citadel, Chancellor Varn finally stood. "We have to respond, publicly. We can't let them humiliate us like this." "No one's listening anymore," said Rel. "They're not looking to you for answers. They're looking at the sky, at the men with the armor and the eyes that have seen 1,000 deaths." Varn slammed his fist against the console. "Then we activate the failsafe." Everyone turned. "The orbital mines," he said. "The black web. It's still in place. 10,000 mines hidden above the cities. Detonate them now. Cripple their fleet. It's our only chance." Jorath's voice echoed from the comm panel. "Don't!" The Chancellor froze. "Captain?" Jorath's face appeared on the screen. Behind him stood the emissary, still silent, still watching. "You activate the failsafe," Jorath said, "and they won't just take the planet. They'll erase it." "They're bluffing." The emissary stepped forward, and for the first time, he spoke directly to the Chancellor. "No bluff. You detonate, we retaliate. And not with bombs. With memory." "What the hell does that mean?" The emissary's voice darkened. "We haven't forgotten what Sarnaxis did during the Purge. The children your ancestors hunted. The colonies you turned to ash. The refugee ships you lured into empty space and abandoned. You wanted to erase our history. Instead, you carved it into our bones." Chancellor Varn's mouth went dry. "We were made in fire," the emissary said. "You lit the match. We've returned to repay the favor." Silence. Then the screen went black. Across the planet, Terran ships descended, not in battle formation but like a migration. Supply vessels, drones, communication hubs. They began linking themselves into the planet's infrastructure, overriding command networks, hijacking satellites, rewriting systems line by line. The takeover wasn't a war. It was a reset. Entire divisions of the Sarnaxis military went offline. Orbital defense grids shut down without a single shot. AI cores were replaced with Terran equivalents. Education systems were purged of Accord propaganda and replaced with historical records. Real ones. Ones the galaxy had buried. In schools, children watched in silence as new holodiscs played footage of burning Earth colonies, of children crying in metal bunkers, of fleets set ablaze in betrayal. history written in ash. And for the first time, they saw the truth. Admiral Kren stood in the control chamber of the Dauntless, his officers silent around him. "Status?" he asked. "Civilian control achieved," replied his executive officer. "Planetary defenses dismantled. No major resistance." "Accord response?" The officer hesitated. "Still none." Kren didn't look surprised. "They're watching, waiting to see what we do next." He turned to the central map projection. Sarnaxis blinked below in red, now marked under Terran command. "Send the message to the Accord High Council." "Yes, sir. What should we say?" Kren stared into the stars. "Tell them Sarnaxis has fallen. Humanity remembers, and this is only the beginning." Back on the surface, Captain Joreth watched as Terran engineers rewired the Citadel. Entire command centers were being converted into information hubs, records restored, Terran flags raised, not as a symbol of dominance, but remembrance. He approached Advisor Rel in the now abandoned war chamber. "You were right," he said quietly. "We were never prepared." She didn't respond at first. Her eyes were red. She'd watched footage earlier, unfiltered data showing what the Accord had done centuries ago. She'd seen faces, names, dead families that had been labeled as necessary losses in official documents. "They had every right to come back," she finally said. "We just never expected them to." Jorath nodded. "What happens now?" Rel looked at the window, where the Terran flag waved above the Citadel. "Now," she whispered, "now we live in the world we created." Elsewhere in the lower city, a father held his son close as Terran troops marched past. The child looked up, wide-eyed. "Are they going to hurt us?" The father didn't answer. One of the soldiers glanced over, but didn't stop. He simply nodded, just a nod. But it said everything. The boy kept staring long after they passed. "They're not monsters," he whispered. "No," the father said. "They're men who were told they didn't belong, and they believed it." The next day, the skies over Sarnaxis cleared. No more drop pods, no weapons fired, but orbit remained full. 10,000 ships, unmoving, unmoved. On every screen, the same message appeared, a broadcast in 100 languages, not from the Accord, not from any galactic power, but from Earth, or what remained of it, Admiral Kren's face. He didn't speak long. He didn't need to. "We are not myths. We are not extinct. We are not gone. You erased us, but we rebuilt. You hunted us, but we survived. We are Terran, and this galaxy will remember our name." Transmission ended. A message not just to Sarnaxis, but to every world that once stood silent while humanity burned. It started with whispers, not from Terran soldiers, not from government officials, from civilians. In marketplaces, in factories, in quiet corners of the cities, people began talking. Not about resistance, not about fighting back, about what they'd never been told. At first, they thought the footage was forged. The Terran records being broadcast in public squares, streamed into homes, uploaded into school systems. It had to be propaganda, right? That's what the government said. That's what the Accord insisted. But it didn't feel like propaganda. The videos weren't flashy. They weren't full of music or graphics. They were raw. They showed orbital colony burnings, mass graves on mining moons, recorded transmissions of final pleas from human outposts begging for help. Help that never came. And documents, real ones, signed by officials still alive today. People began to ask questions. Why was none of this ever taught? Why did no one ever mention the Terran purges, The Blacklist Edict? The Silence Protocols? The answer was simple, because the lies had been easier to live with. In a ruined museum on the edge of the old capital district, Terran soldiers oversaw the reconstruction of a once-locked vault. It had been sealed for generations, written off as damaged during a past seismic event. It wasn't. Inside were thousands of artifacts, ancient Terran weapons, books, family heirlooms, a flag folded in a glass case, dog tags, a child's drawing in faded ink, a photo of a family standing outside a Terran ship just days before their colony went dark. Captain Jorath arrived as the vault was opened. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at the contents. Dust danced in the stale air, untouched for over 100 years. The Terran officer next to him broke the silence. Your people took these, hid them. Jorath nodded slowly. They didn't want reminders. They didn't want witnesses. Across Sarnaxis, the Terran occupation was unlike any in recorded history. There were no forced labor camps, no public executions, no mass arrests. Instead, there were tribunals. Every high-ranking Accord-aligned official was pulled from hiding, not by force, but by exposure. The Terrans released their own data archives, unaltered, names, dates, orders. There was no denial possible. In front of the entire planet, people once revered as heroes were exposed as executioners. The Chancellor's own brother, once a decorated general, had personally signed off on the forced sterilization of entire Terran refugee populations. And the people, Sarnaxis' own, turned on them. For the first time in memory, the planet wasn't divided by politics, class, or creed. It was divided by who had lied and who had lived with it. Admiral Kren stood on the deck of the Dauntless, gazing at the red and white swirl of the planet below. His officers kept quiet. They had all received the same update. 3 more planets had signaled surrender. Not military surrenders, voluntary ones. The truth was spreading faster than any battle ever could. Systems that once proudly waved the Accord's banner were now tearing it down. Citizens demanding answers, demanding justice. Some even requesting Terran protection. Kren turned to his communications officer. Any word from the Accord? They've gone silent, Admiral. He wasn't surprised. This wasn't just about a single world anymore. Humanity hadn't returned for revenge alone. They'd returned to break the illusion. In the deep underground archives of Sarnaxis, a hidden lab was uncovered by Terran intelligence units. Guarded by outdated security bots and sealed behind molecular encryption, it was one of the last true secrets left from the Purge era. Inside, genetic records, experiment logs, cloning attempts, human subjects. Dozens, maybe hundreds, had been taken during the early years of the Purge. Not executed, not exiled, studied. Captain Jorath was present when they opened the chamber. Even hardened Terran soldiers didn't speak. In stasis pods, long-dead bodies floated, preserved, examined, harvested. Children, soldiers, civilians. One plaque read, Specimen T-117. Captured during Operation Nightglass. Age 9. Jorath turned to Rel, who had followed him in. You knew? No, she whispered. But I believed the lies, that they were unstable, dangerous, that the Accord was only protecting the galaxy. They weren't protecting anything, a Terran officer growled. They were making monsters, not out of us, into themselves. The Tribunal for High War Crimes began 1 week after occupation. Held in the rebuilt Citadel chamber, it was open to the public, both local and interstellar broadcasts permitted. And the galaxy watched. One by one, former Accord collaborators were brought forward. Not dragged, not beaten. They walked on their own, because they knew. Their lies were already on display. Some cried, some begged. A few tried to justify their actions. But none denied them. Because the Terrans didn't need to prove their case. They were the proof. In one of the lower districts, a former Accord propagandist named Oren broadcast a personal statement. Once a well-known media figure, he'd spent decades painting humans as myths or threats. But that day, his face was different. Pale. Broken. "I used to laugh at the legends," he said. "I thought the stories of humans were ghost tales, horror fiction to control the masses. But I see now, it wasn't fiction. It was history." He paused, then looked into the camera. "We were the monsters, not them." The feed ended. Still, not everyone accepted the truth. In the Northern Territories, a group of former Accord loyalists staged a violent protest. Armed and enraged, they claimed the Terrans were invaders, manipulators, liars. It didn't last long, not because of the Terran military, but because the people of Sarnaxis rose against them. For the first time, Terrans didn't fight. They watched as civilians marched, unarmed, and surrounded the rebels, refusing to be manipulated again. The rebellion broke in less than an hour. No shots fired. Just truth. Admiral Kren met with Captain Jorath in the Citadel Garden, now cleared and restored with ancient Earth flora, brought back from seed vaults carried through deep space. "I didn't think you'd stay," Kren said. "I thought about leaving," Jorath replied, "but then I realized maybe part of making things right means standing with the ones who were wrong." Kren nodded. "You're not the first. You won't be the last." "What happens next?" Kren looked up at the stars. "We move to the next world. Then the next. We don't conquer. We correct." "And if the Accord retaliates?" Kren's eyes darkened. "Then they become part of the history they tried to erase." Above Sarnaxis, the 10,000 Terran ships held their position. But something was different now. They were no longer seen as harbingers of doom. They were seen as witnesses, survivors. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy was listening. Sarnaxis didn't burn. It didn't fall into chaos. It changed. In less than a month, the entire political structure of the planet was dismantled. Not by war, but by truth. The Chancellor and the senior ministers, stripped of all protection, were turned over to an independent civilian tribunal. Not a single Terran demanded it. The people did. They wanted justice, not because they suddenly loved Terrans, but because they finally hated the ones who had lied to them for so long. The Terran occupation, if anyone still dared call it that, had turned into something else. The word being whispered in streets and back alleys now wasn't invasion. It was liberation. In the orbital command deck of the Dauntless, Admiral Kren studied the next phase. His officers had already projected the star maps, dozens of systems, each with a documented role in the Terran purges. Some had collaborated directly, others had funded it, and a few, the worst of them, had run re-education outposts, death camps disguised as scientific colonies. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. Every soldier aboard the Dauntless had memorized the list. Each system was marked in red, some redder than others. Kren spoke at last, his voice cold and slow. Sarnaxis was just the first stone. His exec, a man who had grown up in the shattered debris of the Vega refugee belt, nodded. "They're watching us now, sir. Every system, every Accord loyalist." "Good," Kren replied. "Let them see what accountability looks like." Back on the surface, Captain Jorath walked through the half-rebuilt Council Plaza. Terran engineers had removed every statue, every plaque that once celebrated the Accord's lies, not destroyed them, archived them, preserved as evidence. "You've been quiet," said Advisor Rel, stepping beside him. "I'm still trying to understand how everything I believed in collapsed in front of my eyes." She nodded. "It didn't collapse. It rotted slowly. You just finally saw the decay." "And the Accord?" he asked. "They're going to let this happen? One planet after another falling into Terran hands?" Rel looked up. "The Accord is afraid, not of Terran weapons, but of Terran memory." On the other side of the galaxy, within the glittering halls of the Accord High Council, panic simmered behind composed faces. Ambassador Zir paced the marble chamber, hands folded tightly. "They've turned Sarnaxis into a symbol," he hissed, "and the people followed. We lost a core world without a single battle." Another counselor, older and visibly rattled, replied, "Then we should declare open war, activate the legacy fleets. The Terrans are terrorists." "Are they?" Zare shot back. "Because right now half our own citizenry believes they're liberators. We can't let them rewrite history." Zare glared. "They're not rewriting it, they're restoring it." The room went still. For the first time in 100 years, doubt had infected the very heart of the Accord. Admiral Kren's fleet prepared for departure. 10,000 ships, one unified arm of purpose, forged by centuries of survival. Their destination, Virelos, an outer ring system that had once hosted one of the Accord's relocation stations. To Terrans, it was known as Grave Point. Before leaving Sarnaxis, Kren met with a small group of civilians in the Citadel, local leaders, activists, survivors. "We will leave behind a communications hub," Kren said. "Open source, no firewalls. All Terran archives will be accessible to your people." One young man raised his hand. "Why us? Why share all this with us?" "Because you're not our enemy," Kren replied. "You're our witness." The night before departure, Captain Jorath stood alone in what used to be the Chancellor's office, the place where laws were written, lives were condemned, and history was rewritten with cold arrogance. Now it was empty. He stared out the glass wall at the sky above, where the Terran fleet shimmered like a wall of justice. A part of him still couldn't believe it. They had come. They had won. Not with bombs or screams, but with memory, precision, and pain. Advisor Rel entered quietly. "You staying?" "For now," he said. "This world's got to learn to stand on its own feet again, without the Accord, without lies." She looked at him. "And without fear." When the Terran fleet finally lifted off, the entire sky seemed to ripple. 10,000 ships ascending together, not in retreat, not in escape, but in purpose. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't have to. Their message had already been carved into the bones of the planet. Days later, in a hidden Accord outpost, far from the major systems, a discovery was made. An old recording, scrambled, degraded, but intact. It showed a human child, crying, alone in a cell. Behind him, two figures argued, one Terran, one Accord officer. The audio was low, but clear enough to hear one thing. "You promised sanctuary." "We lied." The clip went viral in hours. Accord spokespeople scrambled to discredit it, but it was too late. The Terrans weren't just reclaiming territory. They were unearthing the truth, and the truth spread faster than light. On Virelos, panic had already begun before the first Terran ship appeared. Accord military officers tried to reinforce the planetary command, but their own soldiers mutinied, civilians blocked convoys, whole colonies declared neutrality, even loyalty to the incoming Terrans. They weren't waiting for liberation, they were begging for it. "We have a choice," he said. "To fight? To lie, or to confess. If we keep hiding the past, we'll lose everything. But if we own what we did, maybe they'll stop at justice." One voice from the shadows hissed back. "And if they don't?" Zare didn't blink. "Then we deserve what comes next." Virelos wasn't just another system. It was the system. The place where humanity's betrayal reached its most monstrous depth. To the Accord, it was a forgotten outpost, once a bustling administrative node, now reduced to quiet mining colonies and satellite stations orbiting a cold sun. No one visited unless they had a reason, and reasons here were buried deep. To the Terrans, however, Virelos was remembered by a different name: Grave Point. Not because of natural disasters, not because of war, but because this was the site of the first and largest Terran containment camp, a place where tens of thousands of human refugees were rounded up, tagged, and left to rot. Some were never seen again. Admiral Kren stood at the edge of Dauntless observation platform as the fleet moved into Virelos orbit. Behind him, officers ran final scans. Ahead, the hollow remains of the main satellite network flickered, abandoned, unkept, and half swallowed by cosmic dust. "Status report," Kren said without turning. "Orbital defenses, non-existent. Local Accord presence, light, mostly administrative units, no heavy resistance." "Ground?" "Mining colonies mostly, a few listening stations, but there's something else." Kren looked over. "Signal coming from the southern pole. Encrypted, very old signature. Looks Terran, but ancient, pre-exile." Kren straightened. "Send a recon team." The dropships landed like whispers. There were no sirens, no warnings, just long, sleek black vessels easing down onto the old launch pads near the polar ice shelf. The air here was thin, the sky dim. What sunlight there was gave everything a blue-gray tint, almost funereal. Lieutenant Ron led the recon unit. He was born aboard a Terran carrier ship, never stepped foot on a natural planet until he was 10. Raised on survival drills, combat protocols, and history so brutal it had to be taught slowly over years just so kids didn't break down. But even he wasn't prepared for what they found beneath the ice. A hatch, rusted but intact, sealed with Accord codes over Terran etchings. They cut through in under an hour. What waited below was silence. Endless tunnels of cryopods and sterile chambers, dust-covered terminals still glowing faintly after all these years. And then they found the logs. Admiral Kren stood before a cracked wall screen displaying ancient Accord footage. A file marked GRV-003, Test Subject Integration. On screen, a young human man, no older than 20, sat in a metal chair, emaciated, eyes sunken. Accord doctors surrounded him, calm, methodical. The log described stress tolerance experiments, re-education attempts, neural rewiring. What it really was, torture, masked as science. Kren said nothing. But his hands curled into fists. His officer stepped forward. "There are more. Hundreds of files, some even older. It looks like they were trying to find a way to erase our instincts." Another paused. "To make humans docile, programmable." The silence that followed was louder than a gunshot. Meanwhile, on the surface, Virelos civilians, mostly workers, settlers, and Accord functionaries, had already begun to evacuate. Not because of Terran orders, because of rumors. Rumors of the files being uncovered, of the return of the remnant, of Gravepoint rising again. Within hours, riots erupted in the outer colonies. Accord flags were torn down. Civil police units abandoned their posts. Some tried to destroy terminals and archives, but the Terrans were faster. They deployed surveillance drones, ground teams, and mobile data rigs, locking the entire planet into a digital cage. Nothing was going to be hidden this time. Back in orbit, Kren held a secure meeting with 3 Terran generals. "We release everything," he said. "All of it. Don't wait. Don't filter. Let the galaxy choke on the truth." General Thas, who had once lost his brother in the original Virelos purge, nodded grimly. "What if the Accord finally responds? With force?" Kren's eyes didn't flinch. "Then we force them to expose themselves. If they show up here, after everything we've uncovered, they won't be defenders. They'll be protectors of this filth." He tapped the screen showing footage of children in restraint chambers. "Let them try." The next transmission from the Dauntless wasn't a warning. It was a broadcast. Galaxy-wide, open source, no encryption. Millions of terminals flickered. Screens turned black, then showed the Terran flag. Then a message. "This is Grave Point. This is what the Accord buried. This is what you were never supposed to see." Then came the footage. Raw. Undeniable. Families screaming as they were dragged from freighters. Rows of dead in cryopods never meant to revive. Medical trials. Executions. A slow-motion genocide, denied for centuries, unfolded before the eyes of trillions. And the galaxy changed. On Accord World after Accord World, protests erupted, not just in Terran sympathetic systems. Even core Accord planets, once loyal to the regime, faced uprisings. People wanted answers, truth, accountability. In the Accord High Council chamber, Ambassador Zaire stood alone against a wall of denial. "We have to respond," one elder snapped. "This is coordinated psychological warfare." Zaire slammed his fist on the table. "It's truth, and it's stronger than anything we ever built." "They're trying to destroy the Accord." "No," Zaire said quietly. "They're trying to make us face what we destroyed." Down on Virelos, Captain Yorath arrived by shuttle. He had asked to be part of the operation. Personally. "I need to see it," he told Admiral Kren. "All of it." Kren didn't say yes right away, but eventually he gave the nod. Inside the ice-bound facility, Jorath walked past chambers of horror. His hands trembled as he saw the files, the cells, the broken remains of the people his world once called myths. "These were our neighbors," he whispered. "Our ancestors." "No," Kren corrected gently. "They were yours. You just didn't know it." In one room, far beneath the rest, a miracle waited. One pod still functioned. A Terran child, barely alive, cryogenically stable. Kren stood over the pod, Jorath beside him. "He was left here to die," Kren said, "and yet he lived." Jorath stared at the face through the glass. A name etched into the pod's side. Levin. Age, 6. Status, uncooperative. The boy's eyes fluttered open. For the first time in 100 years. The cryo chamber hissed. Steam poured out in slow, spiraling plumes as the seal broke, and for the first time in over a century, the boy named Levin inhaled fresh air. His chest rose sharply, then dropped, trembling as if his lungs had to remember what it meant to breathe. Admiral Kren stood in silence. So did Captain Jorath. No one moved, not the med team, not the soldiers posted at the door. The child opened his eyes. Wide, dark. Aged not by time, but by something deeper. Something left behind in frozen silence. He looked around slowly. No panic. No confusion. Just stillness. And then a whisper. "Where's my mother?" Kren's throat tightened. The med officer stepped forward slowly. "You've been asleep. A long time." Levin blinked. "A long time," the boy echoed. Word of Levin's awakening spread through the Terran fleet like wildfire. Not just because he was alive, but because he was real. A child torn from Earth, dragged across stars to Virelos, marked for reconditioning, and forgotten. Yet he had survived, sealed inside a tomb of steel while the universe moved on. A Terran ghost, come back to life. On the Dauntless, Kren watched the security feed as Levin sat quietly on a medical bed, eyes tracking every movement in the room. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't even curious. He was calculating. "You think he remembers?" Jorath asked beside him. Kren didn't answer for a long time. "Trauma doesn't care about age. If they experimented on him, if they ran neural loops before freezing him, he might remember everything, or fragments, nightmares." "He hasn't asked what year it is, because he already knows it doesn't matter." Within hours, the galaxy knew. The boy from Virelos, the only living survivor of the Gravepoint purges, the child whose name was marked uncooperative for refusing to recite Accord propaganda during reconditioning. The Terrans didn't exploit the story. They didn't need to. Billions wept. Millions rioted. 1,000 protests erupted across Accord territory. On Core 5, 3 Accord governors were assassinated by their own security forces. On Tendraxis, a rogue Accord freighter defected to the Terrans, broadcasting a looped message, "Forgive us, Levin." The galaxy wasn't just watching anymore, it was breaking. Inside the Citadel-like command center on Virelos, Levin sat with Admiral Kren. Not as an interrogator, not as a commander, but as a man who had lived long enough to know that some wounds never heal. They just harden. "Do you remember anything?" Kren asked gently. Levin nodded slowly. "I remember cold," he said. "I remember lights, loud ones, needles, men with masks. One of them asked me if I wanted to be a good boy." He paused. I bit him. Jorath, standing near the wall, flinched. Kren's voice was low. "Do you know what happened to your family?" Levin didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence told them everything. The Terran medical logs confirmed what Kren already suspected. Levin's cryopod had been modified, deliberately kept running even after the lab was abandoned. Not for mercy. For study. He had been monitored remotely, his brain scanned, his vitals recorded. A living specimen, not a child. A data point. Jorath read the reports and felt his hands tremble. "I served the Accord," he whispered. "I believed in its laws, its mission." Kren stared at the screen. So did Levin's executioners. On the far edge of Accord space, the High Council cracked. Ambassador Zaire stood before the others, face pale with the weight of 1,000 buried sins. "We've lost control of the narrative," he said. "There's no denying it anymore." An elder slammed her fist down. "Then we ban the broadcast, shut down Terran feeds, seize their tech, scramble their signals." "It won't work," Zaire said. "The truth is viral, and the boy, he's not just a child, he's a symbol now." "Then we destroy the symbol." Zaire turned slowly, eyes narrowed. For the first time, he saw it plainly in their faces. Not fear, desperation. Back on Virelos, a Terran intelligence officer rushed into the chamber. "Admiral, we intercepted a high-level transmission. Origin unknown. But it's a chord. Kren turned. Play it. The room darkened. The feed flickered. Then came a voice. This is Executor Solon of the Accord Restoration Authority. You have committed acts of galactic destabilization, unauthorized reclamation of planetary systems, and illegal manipulation of historical archives. You have 72 hours to withdraw from Virelos and release the subject named Levin. Kren's eyes narrowed. Or what? As if in reply, the message continued. Failure to comply will result in the activation of Protocol Virilux, complete orbital sterilization of Virelos. Consider this your final notice. The feed ended. Joreth stepped forward, stunned. They'd wipe their own system. They already did, Kren said coldly. We just didn't catch them last time. The countdown began. 72 hours. The Terran fleet initiated full planetary lockdown. Orbital defense rings armed. Sensor nets expanded. Ground-to-space shields activated. But it wasn't fear that moved them. It was resolve. Admiral Kren stood before the planetary display and spoke to his officers. They want to silence us. Again, they think they can erase the boy like they erased our past. He looked around, voice rising. But this time, we remember. Levin, still quiet, watched through the reinforced glass as ships danced in the sky above Virelos. His eyes, unblinking, followed the shadows they cast. He turned to Kren, who sat beside him again. Why do they want me dead? Kren answered with the honesty of a man who had seen too much to lie. Because you prove they failed, and you're still alive. Levin nodded slowly. I don't want revenge. No, Kren said softly. But you want justice. The boy's voice lowered to a whisper. I want them to feel what I felt. Time doesn't crawl when you're waiting for death. It runs. Fast. Sharp. Like a knife across the skin of a world that knows its past is coming back in flames. The countdown to Protocol Virilux dropped to 4 hours. The Terran fleet was locked in formation, battle-ready but unmoving. 10,000 ships circling Virelos like a black halo of judgment. Every gun, every sensor, every countermeasure had been activated. But no one was rushing. No one panicked. They'd been here before, just not this openly, not with the eyes of an entire galaxy watching. Inside the Dauntless, Admiral Kren stood at the center of the main command hall. Holograms hovered around him, detailing ship positions, enemy movements, pulse readings from deep space channels. He was calm. So were his officers. We hold position, he said. No strike unless fired upon. They want to bait us. To trigger panic. But we don't react. Not yet. One of his fleet commanders frowned. If they launch orbital sterilization, Virelos is gone. All our people. The child. They'll be ready, Kren said. We have countermeasures. And if we fail, then we broadcast everything in real time. He turned. They won't just be killing a planet. They'll be confessing to the universe. On the surface, Captain Joreth stood beside Levin on the high observation deck of the Citadel. The boy was quiet, face bathed in the pale blue light of Virelos's thin sun. His eyes never left the sky. You scared? Joreth asked. Levin didn't move. Not anymore. Why? Because if they kill me, Levin said, then everyone will know they were always afraid. Of the truth, of what I am. Joreth looked at him. And what are you? Levin turned finally, voice steady. I'm the part they couldn't erase. 2 hours left. The Accord fleet appeared. Not a scout, not a threat. A wall of capital ships, carriers, orbital artillery cruisers, over 60 vessels warped into the outer rim of the system, forming a blockade line that pulsed with raw energy. Their weapons weren't armed yet, but they were primed. The signal came moments later. A simple transmission. One sentence. "Surrender the asset, or be sterilized." Kren stared at the message on the holo display. He didn't flinch. "Broadcast back," he said. "To everyone, public channel." The officer nodded. Kren stepped forward. His face appeared on every device, every screen, every military relay node across known space. "Admiral Kren, the man who brought the ghosts back." His voice was cold steel. "The Accord demands our silence again, this time through mass extermination. Again. And once more, they're targeting the only survivor of their own atrocities, Levin, the child they failed to break. They call him an asset. We call him a symbol. If they strike this world, let every system know what it means. The Accord has chosen death over admission, destruction over confession. Let history see them for what they are. On Sarnaxis, the people gathered in plazas, staring up at massive screens. On Tendraxis, miners dropped tools and stood shoulder to shoulder around emergency transmitters. On Core 5, thousands flooded the steps of the Accord's own diplomatic center, chanting a single word: justice. 30 minutes left. Then the Accord made their move. Not a full sterilization strike, not yet. Just one missile. Fired directly at the Terran fleet, a test, a warning shot. It was enough. The Terrans intercepted it mid-flight, neutralizing it without returning fire. Kren's voice rang out again. "We are not your weapons, we are your memory." Then the Dauntless activated its final protocol. It wasn't a weapon. It was a broadcast array. Everything, every file, every document from Virelos's deep core archives, every experiment log, every deleted name, every audio file of children screaming, every silent death the Accord buried, unfiltered, unedited, beamed into every planet in the Accord network. Levin's name, his face, his cry. The Terrans didn't need missiles. They had truth, and they let it burn through every firewall like wildfire in oxygen. Then something changed. From the Accord fleet, a signal cut in, but not from the high command, from inside one of their ships, a captain, a defection, live feed. The image was shaky, the captain's face red with anger. "I will not be part of this. I refuse to serve monsters in golden robes. I will not kill a child to protect a lie." Then more ships turned. First one, then two, then 7. Within 10 minutes, nearly a third of the Accord fleet had turned their guns away from Virelos. The others hesitated. Inside the Accord High Council chambers, chaos erupted. Zaire stood silent while others screamed. "What do we do now? The soldiers are defecting." "Destroy the planet. We've already lost control." Then Zaire spoke. "Let them." Every face turned toward him. "If we destroy Virelos, the Terrans win the narrative. If we back down, the galaxy revolts." He looked around slowly. "We've already lost." Back on Virelos, Kren watched the live fleet feeds. The Accord ships were retreating. Slowly, quietly. One by one, without firing another shot, they blinked out of orbit and vanished into deep space. The sterilization threat was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. But no one cheered, no one danced. They just stood and let the weight of it all fall. Jarath turned to Levin. "They're leaving." Levin didn't smile. He just asked, Does that mean it's over? Jorath shook his head. Number it means it's beginning. In the weeks that followed, more Terran fleets moved through Accord territory, not to conquer, but to unveil. Planet by planet, station by station, truth took root. Monuments toppled, history rewritten with blood and clarity. And at the center of it all was the boy who lived in the silence. Levin. He never asked for power. But he became something more powerful than a leader. He became a mirror. And everywhere the Terrans went, they held that mirror up to the galaxy. On the day the Accord officially dissolved, Admiral Kren and Levin stood side by side in front of a new monument on Virelos. Not tall, not grand, just a metal slab, engraved with every forgotten name from the Gravepoint files. At the bottom, one sentence. We remember, so it never happens again.